Thank you for coming today. My name is Matt Hawout, and I'm going to present to you my senior research paper, Agenda Setting Theory in an Age of Horizontal Media. And today I'm going to discuss with you the history of agenda setting theory, how agenda setting theory functions online, how the effect has been weakened by new horizontal media, and lastly, what this means for consumers. But let's go back to the beginning first. From the beginning, humanity has struggled to connect with each other and the world outside of itself. The spread of communication was dictated by what the terrain was like, what the weather conditions were, and its efficiency dictated by the speed of a horse. But today, information can be spread instantaneously by entities with the power to do so, that run radio stations, television stations. And this change became the basis for what Eugene Shaw and Maxwell McCombs, two researchers in the 1960s, decided to look at. They wanted to understand how traditional media, by the way they presented information, would have the ability to influence their consumers. And this idea became agenda setting theory. And what it comes down to is that whatever the media deems salient through repetition and framing, people that consume those media products will also view as important. So to understand where we're headed in a new media generation, we need to understand where the origins of the theory came from. And it started in 1968 with the now famous Chapel Hill study. And there, McCombs and Shaw went to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and asked 100 people what they felt the most important issues were facing the country in this election. They then coded what the media had been saying, national, local, what the important issues of the campaign would be. And they found that there was a near perfect correlation between what the media said was important and covered and what the consumers there said was important. And since then, there's been over 400 studies conducted that have continued to make this theory be regarded as relevant. However, with the fracturing of media into new media, blogs, social media, online news, this has changed the dynamic. And it's been bringing up questions of relevance for a theory that stood for 50 years. In new media landscape, agenda setting theory remains relevant, but it is now in a diminished state. And these changes are interesting for the future of media and societal dialogue. And they're right now in a transformative balancing act to the top-down influence of vertical media. Most of the studies conducted on agenda setting theory have been done in a political setting. Since the Internet's inception, new horizontal media has been a force in promoting new agendas. New media constitutes a more commons-based peer production where consumers are also producers of media. And they also have agendas that may not always adhere to vertical traditional media agendas. Like the original study, web research has focused on the political setting, as I said. The partisan nature of blogs draws users that go towards information that is already aligns with their pre-existing beliefs. It can be understood by the concept of agenda melding, which you can understand with the phrase, birds of a feather flock together. Researcher Sharon Mraz in 2011 confirmed this diminished effect when she found that through analyzing blog content, she found less correlation on right-wing blogs than on their leftist and centrist counterparts. It showed a diminishing effect of a theory that still held. And like political settings, age has also been studied in agenda setting studies. Coleman and McCombs, that being McCombs of the original study, conducted they had a hypothesis that users that got less information from from traditional sources would have less of an agenda setting effect. And you can see here on this chart where they did rank stories. They asked users based on their age where they got most of their media content. And in the 18 to 34 rank is what we'll come back to. But you can see basically on what these traditional news stories regarded as importance, economy being first, terrorism, war, healthcare, and education in that order. Older generations who use more traditional media also agree that those are the most important issues in that order. But you do have one change, an anomaly in the education issue between the 18 to 34 group, where education flips and becomes a higher rated in importance than does the older generations. And Coleman and McCombs in that study, they believed that that the use of media had not affected agenda setting effect at all. But I'm not completely sure I agree with that. The researchers themselves in the study admitted that the younger generation had avoided the effect possibly by, quote, selectively exposing themselves to news of education more than any other age group, or they were unsure if that was whether the media they used featured more education news coverage. And this is a hallmark of new media, the ability for users to cater what is important to them, what is relevant to them, and have content that coincides with that. And this is easy to be understood if you think about what your Facebook page likes. By liking pages, you're able to get content that is going to be exposed to what you deem relevant for your own life. And the merging of horizontal and vertical media has also been explored. Walston in 2007 found the relationship to be a complex bidirectional model and not a unidirectional top-down model. They both interact with each other. And Sharon Mraz in 2009 studied this trend by looking at hyperlinks, which are the currency of new media. She looked at 3,700 hyperlink sources, and she wanted to see where those links originated, whether they came from elite blogs, those run by traditional media sources like the New York Times and Washington Post, or from citizen-generated media. And in that analysis, she found that 50% of those 3,700 links pointed to elite sources, traditional sources, but 33% of them pointed to citizen-generated media, which just continues to show how this new media is changing the landscape of how people get information. They no longer have to rely on these top-down institutions. And big data has also been essential in understanding how this effect works online. Newman, Guggenheim, Zhang, and Bay, 2014, did a study where they looked at the 29 most important issues that they obtained from a survey organization that did voter surveys to see what was important to voters at that time. So they took those 29 issues, broke them down into categories like economics, foreign policy, and coded content from 13,000 social media commentaries. They had access to a huge Twitter feed. 4,500 traditional news stories, and they did that for every single day of the year 2012. There was 366 days that year. It was a leap year. And from this massive study, a lot of information was obtained. Here's one example where you're looking at just the employment issue. And you can see traditional media is here in blue and social media in red. And sometimes you can see where social media leads traditional media stories based on like the State of the Union address. You have a buzz on social media before traditional media coverage. And then you have social media response to traditional media coverage. But it's no longer this one is perfectly even, whatever traditional media says, social media then echoes. It's not that way anymore. From this massive study, the researchers concluded that new and old media interact, quote, dynamically in an intertwined interactivity to the issues and current events. Importantly, social media provides ample evidence that their characteristic issue attentiveness, issue framing, are not slavishly dependent on, but rather quite independent of, the voice of traditional media, institutional spokespersons, and professional journalism. So what does this mean for consumers? Well, with new media, you are able to avoid traditional media tropes, such as a need for attention-grabbing presentation or reliance on like more financial matters like shareholder stakes, which creates a more democratic press. The hyperlinks that I mentioned before that are, like I said, were the currency of new media, now enable users to not just have to take the word of a pundit or a newscaster for information. They can now say, there's the source, look at it yourself, and make your own outcome. New media has freed us from traditional media in that way. And new media is now able to highlight arguments that Woodley 2008 described as traditional media missing, ignoring, deflecting, or denying. And going back to Sharon Mraz 2009, she said that, quote, citizens' media efficacy is on its aggregate effect, an effect which is able to blunt traditional media's singular agenda-setting effect. So in summary, I've discussed with you the history of agenda-setting theory, how this effect functions online, how the effect has been weakened by the formation of new media, and what this means for consumers of media. Agenda-setting theory has long been poised to explain how traditional media can affect its viewers' perceptions. But as my previous examples have shown, new media now stands ready to promote a different agenda that is not necessarily in line with traditional media, weakening its effect. Only time is going to tell if agenda-setting effect is going to remain in the future. But for now, consumers have more choice than ever before. Thank you.